A great example of that is one of the questions that we very specifically tried to avoid in our Fundamentals of Software Architecture book is, what is the difference between design and architecture? Because it's just one of those tar pits of never-ending argument and who knows and nuance, et cetera. But in Head First, we felt compelled to really address that question. And that seems like a relevant question at a conference named Domain-Driven Design, to talk about what the difference between architecture and design is. So let's talk a little bit about architecture versus design, and then we'll come back to trade-off analysis in software architecture and why you can't treat them the same. So like many things in software architecture, it's not a binary as to whether you are architecture versus design, but rather a sort of a messy spectrum of where do you fall in this spectrum between architecture versus design. But there's some criteria that pulls you toward one side versus the other. And we separate these with 4 letters. We actually do this as an exercise in some of our classes. Architecture decisions tend to be strategic, whereas design decisions tend to be more tactical. Strategic meaning this is a long-term decision that is going to affect a lot of things. In other words, significant trade-offs associated with this decision, whereas tactical things, a lot less important trade-offs associated with those kind of decisions. Typically, architecture decisions require high effort to change that decision. If I choose a particular architecture style, it is a very large effort to change to another architecture style. If I change something about a user interface, it's fairly trivial to change it to something else. So architecture versus design. And then finally, architecture decisions are ones that have significant trade-offs associated with it. And design, well, I don't want to use insignificant, but less significant trade-offs associated with tactical or design kinds of decisions. And so one of the things you have to decide as an architect is it more about architecture or design? So we're considering using microservices for the new system. That's very much an architecture level decision because it affects pretty much every aspect of the system. It affects deployment, the way you do deployment, it affects design, it affects capabilities. Pretty much everything data is affected hugely by that. We need to move the cancel button to the bottom of the screen. Obviously a trivial thing to do, and you can do that in just a few minutes. But a lot of these decisions are a whole lot more nuanced. We're considering breaking the single payment service into separate services, one for each payment type. Now, this gets to one of the perpetual problems we have in software architecture is its philosophy versus engineering. So what is the correct granularity for service in microservices? Well, it's supposed to be single purpose. Okay, great. That's a great philosophy, but what does single purpose mean? Are all notifications single purpose? Or are all customer notifications single purpose? Or is each kind of customer notification single purpose? Because I could argue over drinks, any one of those as being singular enough to be single purpose. So we need something more than just philosophy to help us with engineering tasks like this. One of the questions we frequently get, and this goes to the heart of architecture versus design, is, well, why do you need architecture at all? Why don't you just start and then emerge the architecture over time? Turns out you can't do that.